Hello and welcome to the Cinema Savvy Movie Podcast, the channel for film reviews, discussions and everything in between. I'm Chris Garner, joined with my co-host George Aldridge, and today, for another episode of our Film Club midweek show, we're going to be bringing you our review on X-Men Days of Future Past, the Rogue Cut. We're going to go into our thoughts on the actual film as well at the end, but we're going to talk about all the new scenes that are added and if we think it changes our perceptions on the film at all. But yeah, why don't we just jump straight into it then? So this came out a few days for us. I think it did in the US as well. I went straight to the town to pick it up when you recommended it last week. Actually, we'll go into that first. What are a few of your reasons why you picked this film following our main show from last time?
Well, it does very lightly tie into Pixar, but the main thing was that because it was Comic-Con and stuff, you kind of felt obliged for something like this, so I was specifically searching for reasons to pick this film, and I found a fair few. Some of them you pointed out with The Incredibles being linked to killing of people, but the best one I got was Kevin Spacey, who was in Bug's Life, was also in X-Men.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Not X-Men. He was in Usual Suspects, which was directed by Bryan Singer, who basically runs the X-Men franchise.
I would love Kevin Spacey to be in an X-Men film. I'm just saying because he's great. But yeah. So I think this extended cut runs for about just under 20 minutes extra. And outside of Lord of the Rings and like the Hobbit films, which you come to expect with Peter Jackson, I think it's quite unusual where you get an extended cut that comes out a year after. You don't really see many of them now. And it's nice because I do think it does change the film as a whole. Not massively, but it sort of embellishes it a little.
Yeah, I think with this, when it originally came out of the cinema, one of my main things was how they're going to hit the balance right between the old guys and the new ones. Because obviously I'm a massive fan of the first class, but everyone wanted to see the old guys return. So I remember I think it came in at about 2 hours 10, which was a bit odd because I remember saying to you a minute ago that I thought the original cut would have been a lot longer and had the extended push it to like a 3 because the size of the cast would have been very easy to. But actually this takes up to about 2 hours 28, and it's still 20 minutes. It's rare to do it, but it kind of adds these little bits and bobs and a bit of sort of fan credit going, oh, they'll like this bit, that bit, and it's quite nice to see an extended edition. But if you actually look at the film itself, due to time travel and the size of the cast, it was natural that they were going to have a longer cut for this, just because they didn't want to give anyone so little screen time.
And I remember, I think Bryan Singer, the director, said something about the reason he cut the scenes were that although he enjoyed the scenes, he felt that it slowed the pace of the film down. And we'll get into our thoughts overall on the Rogue Cut before we move into our review as it is of Days of Future Past. What we'll do is we'll go through all the notable scenes that we can think of. We may have forgotten a few, but I don't think we're that well versed on the theatrical cut yet to pick out everything, but we'll do our best to try and find everything that we did. So the first scene, really, it's a very short scene. It comes in towards the beginning in the whole future stuff with the original cast, where when Kitty's talking about going back in time and changing the past, all that stuff, we get a little bit of dialogue from the new mutants that are introduced of Bishop, Warpath, Blink and Sunspark. And they talk about the fact that if they change the past, then there's a good chance that their mutants may not exist in the future. And I think that's nice because if you take that scene out, really, I think Bishop gets one line. The others might get a couple of lines as well, but not much. And although they still don't get a massive focus in the Rogue Cut, it's nice to hear them talk. And I think Halle Berry's character of Storm gets a line in there as well.
Yeah, with this moment, what I like most is the fact that this isn't a reboot, this film, but it basically is resetting it for what they want to do. What I notice is that when they're talking about, oh yeah, we might not exist, they focus on Colossus, played by Daniel Cudmore, and straight away I thought to myself, I was like, right, that's because he's going to be in Deadpool, and I believe they've got a new actor for it. So it's one of them where they're now getting bits and bobs, so that basically means we can now do what we want. You're seeing Angel, who was in X-Men 3, he's now going to be like a teenager in Apocalypse. You're seeing Jean Grey, the teenage years, Apocalypse set in the early 80s. And I believe in X-Men 3 she was about 6 years old in like 1986. So it's one of them where it's enabling them to do their own thing, but having that line or two of dialogue is explaining all their changes, which is it's not odd, but I thought that should have been in the original cut because it's going to make things clearer for the audience now when they go into the next film, seeing these familiar characters with different ages. So I think it worked and it was good to see. So it's just got a bit of explanation for the future.
And I think it's sort of a relevant question they bring up because they obviously don't want to die, but then when there's that kind of funny line where they say, right, we'll put it to a vote, and Xavier goes, they already did, because he can obviously read their minds. It shows that they are willing to sacrifice themselves to, better and to help the other mutants survive, which I liked. And then we get another short little scene. It's kind of a pointless one, really. It's after Wolverine's sent back and he wakes up in his younger body, and obviously he was sleeping with the boss's daughter. There's a scene where after he beats up all the guys and he goes outside, he just kind of sits in the car with her and he just tells her to lay low for a while. Kind of a pointless scene, doesn't really add anything to the film. I don't know if you've got any opinions on that scene.
No, it was kind of I knew they're going to put him in the car, but she's just there and it just felt like he's just saying it for the hell of it. So it was a bit random. So no issue with getting rid of that at all.
I can't even remember how that goes in the actual cut. I don't know if you see him driving off, but they just cut her bit out, or if it ends with him beating up the guys, grabbing the keys, and that's it.
Yeah, I think that's how it finished in the original cut as well. It just that kind of worked easy. If he's got the keys, he can just go.
And then the next scene we get is where they need to recruit Quicksilver, and they go to the house. There's a short scene where Quicksilver's little sister speaks to Wolverine, and she says, like, I'm a princess, and he says, I'm the Wolverine. And then we get a little hint to the character of Scarlet Witch, where the mum tells the little girl to go check on her sister upstairs. Now, when I watched Days of Future Past, I thought their take on Scarlet Witch was the little girl because she had the red hair, and there's that scene towards the end where a big brother, Quicksilver's watching the TV with her. So I thought, oh, okay, that's how they've done it. But apparently we're alluded to another sister here, which will be the Scarlet Witch.
Yeah, because I remember when it came out, she was in a trailer, the little girl, saying, oh yeah, I'm a princess. Everyone thought, oh my god, it's Scarlet Witch, because obviously Quicksilver's the brother.
Yeah.
And then I think Bryan Singer quickly came and goes, no. He goes, oh, she mentions the sister upstairs who would be Scarlet Witch. And it's one of them kind of little cool Easter eggs, although the little girl's wearing the tiara like Scarlet Witch does. But also what I like in this film, they don't rely on it, and it's in the original cut still. When Quicksilver is with him, he's like, oh yeah, my mum said she knew a guy who could control metal. And then Wolverine's face, not Wolverine, Magneto's face kind of just pulls.
Yeah.
It's not saying he's the dad, but it's just a subtle hint for the future. But that would be awesome if they did that, because in the comics he is.
Yeah, I love that that Easter egg in the film. I think that was probably the smartest way to do it if they didn't want to outright say that they are. The comic book fans can put two and two together, and I think that's brilliant. And I mean, for those, I didn't pick up on the fact that that was Scarlet Witch until obviously I watched the Rogue cut. So the next scene, this is where we start getting into the main body of scenes now a little bit. There's a scene where Beast walks in the mansion and speaks to Wolverine, and he asks if he makes it in the future. Now, the same line of dialogue was in the theatrical cut, but that came right at the end when they were trying to stop Magneto when he was trying to kill the president. But they kind of changed the context a little bit here. It seems a bit more somber and more believable in the theatrical cut. Although I love the scene in the theatrical cut, it was more played for laughs and a little bit of levity in that end scene. So by removing that bit at the end, I think it makes the end a bit more intense because they just jump straight into the attack rather than talking about it before. And there's a few little funny lines here. I know we were talking about it before we started record, so if you want to take this one.
Yeah, I think what they do, they pull that scene back completely, which works better for me. What happens is Beast goes into a room. It's at night at the mansion. Wolverine's there, smoke everywhere. Actually, they kind of do a second Drake before. He's like, oh yeah, he's like, these things can give you cancer. And then Wolverine just silently just picks up the next cigar and just starts smoking it. I know that's a little laugh bit this, but then the king of it goes, oh, do I make it in the future? And obviously we've heard the line before, but this time Wolverine just snaps back straight away like, no. And Nicholas Hoult just pulls this face and begins to walk out, and then Wolverine kind of pulls him back in and goes, "But that's my future." So it was a nice little joke, and I think that scene worked because it's just this little bit of comic relief that a film like this needs. But it's always great to see like the sarcastic Wolverine, especially the best bit being his cameo in First Class.
Oh yeah, and they even refer to that in the film, don't they? That's in the theatrical cut. But I like this scene with Beast because it does show Wolverine's human side a bit. Like when he snaps back at him, that's the classic Wolverine we know. And then when he sees Beast's reaction, he's like, "Oh shit!" Like, but we're gonna change that, and you kind of see that humanity to him a bit more. Um, yeah, so that's a nice scene. And then really straight after that, this is where I believe this follows the bit where Charles tries to get into Mystique's head in the train station.
Yeah.
So she heads back to the mansion. This is all completely new for the Rogue Cut. And she reunites with Beast because obviously they had a thing together in First Class.
And in real life.
And in real life. Oh, I didn't know that.
Didn't you? Oh,
No, I didn't know that.
On and off relationship for years. They did.
Yeah. But I like this scene, although they do bring up the line "mutant and proud," which was one of my most cringeworthy lines from First Class, because that was just taking the subtext way too on the nose. But it's nice because it's another link back to First Class, and it shows that they're not completely forgetting that film happened. And they would still have feelings for each other because they had that whole romance thing in First Class, and then for the theatrical cut of Days of Future Past, that just seemed to be mostly dropped. So it was nice that they still referred to that here.
Yeah, and that's the thing. So in the trailers, she was originally in the house on all of that, and when she went and filmed, people goes, "Oh, they've cut a few things. It's actually, oh, it's just going to be extended." And I think the scene works because you're right. They absolutely drop it from the theatrical cut, so you just get this bit of gravity towards it when they have that moment. But then also, obviously, it builds up to the bigger picture, which is when she destroys Cerebro, so Charles can't find her. And I didn't see this coming at all. I hadn't heard it mentioned or anything like that. I don't know if you had.
No, I hadn't heard of anything about this scene. And when you watch it, it completely makes sense because that's totally in line with the character of Mystique. That's something she would totally do. And when you just start starting to warm to her again and think she's changed her ways, she's still got her own agenda and her own mission. And I didn't even question this in the main film. Like, I was thinking, why don't they just use Cerebro to, find Mystique? I don't believe they show a ruined Cerebro helmet in the theatrical cut. But when you watch this, and it's back in context in the film, you're like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes total sense.
Yeah, in the theatrical cut, it's kind of they use Cerebro once, just the same way they're doing this one, and then that's it. It's gone. They don't use it again. Whereas in this, it kind of gives a bit more depth to it, answers an easy plot hole, but also it just has this moment where she came back just to see. You think she's coming back for Beast, but actually she's got her agenda. That's why she's done it, and I think she knew she could half use Beast to do it, and that kind of gives it a bit more when going towards the final scene of the film when they're searching for her and all of that. Because I bet if they had Cerebro, Charles would probably have stayed at home or something.
And I can't remember, but doesn't Mystique share a final glance with Beast at the very end before she walks off, or is that with Charles? I can't remember.
What in the actual end of the film bit?
Yeah, when she doesn't shoot the president and she starts to walk off, I think she look back over at them.
I think
something like that. So that's a nice little resolution to the character.
Yeah, I think she just briefly, but then it's kind of teeing her off, and obviously she has early credit scene with Wolverine, which I don't know if it's going to be fleshed out in Apocalypse, but
I hope so because I think that leaves it off in a really interesting place, and it would be kind of weird if they just miss that out. But in terms of the road cut stuff now we get into the main body of scenes, and these are just a continuous string of new scenes now. This is where we finally get Rogue in it, and what we get is they play up the relationship more with Iceman and Kitty. From watching this cut, they're in a relationship, whereas in the theatrical, I still got the impression that they were in a relationship even when I watched that, but it's a lot more subtle. And then they realised this is after Wolverine's freaked out on the table and he's accidentally stabbed Kitty in the future. So she's bleeding out. Iceman goes up to Magneto and Charles and says, "Look, we need a replacement. Rogue has the ability to take other people's powers. Let's go and get her. She can take Kitty's power and continue the process with Wolverine," which makes complete sense if you're going to bring Rogue into it. It's a really cool way of actually bringing her into the picture and bringing her into the battle. But they say something like Charles can't locate her, and they put two and two together and think that she must be in Cerebro because that's obviously protected and no thoughts can get into it. So they Iceman goes there with Magneto and they go to the mansion, and there's this really, really creative, cool bit of editing where they parallel Magneto helping people in the future and then him becoming a villain and grabbing the helmet in the past.
Yeah, and I loved this bit because I'd heard that, oh yeah, apparently the editing's awesome with Magneto in this. And it's just, the parallels work so well. I mean, we can go through it in a bit, but the best bit I got of this is because I love seeing Ian McKellen's Magneto do cool things. Magneto's one of my favourite characters on cinema. I've always loved his presence on screen. And it's this bit when they kind of just walk into the room. I know it's jumping towards the end bit, but it's when he just flings up all of the knives, syringes, and everything. Points, and it's like, right, you can just see that evil side to him coming back. But obviously, he doesn't go ahead and kill them. But it was so cool just to see him do that one moment. But then interlocking with the past bit, the Michael Fassbender Magneto is as awesome as Ian McKellen, especially the bar scene off First Class. But what I said to you straight away was that my favourite part of this is easily there's a moment where he's in the cupboard, he's about to get his helmet back, but he notices this thing on the side. Then they zoom in, and it's the coin where he's used to kill Kevin Bacon in the first one. It's the mother's thing. So seeing that, although it was only for 5-10 seconds, just that little extended bit, it kind of gave this gravitas where it's actually properly connecting it to First Class for one of the few times it does. And it was a really awesome throwback, which I was happy they put in because I don't think they link it enough to First Class in this film.
And I think Magneto seeing that coin sort of not refreshed his mind, but it sort of instilled that yes, what I'm doing is right, because obviously that plays into the whole Holocaust thing of his past, and he thinks that mutants are going to end up the same way, so that reinforced his opinion, and it was like, yeah, and that's when he gets the helmet. And also, how it was all edited, I don't know if you got this impression as well, it might just be me, I really got like a comic book sense for it. Like, I could imagine these being like a series of panels in a written comic book flashing between the two timelines, how it was edited. It seemed very, you know how Watchmen has those moments where in the flashbacks and stuff it'll link, it's sort of like Lost as well, if anyone's watched that, bits that are happening in the future echo to the past, so it cuts between the two. I absolutely loved that and thought that was brilliant.
I thought, sorry,
no, go on, sorry.
I was just going to say that I thought when they have the voiceover as well with him walking, you're right, it's exactly like a sort of comic book feel to it, and you can literally picture, because some of the shots are very much like a panel, it just works brilliantly.
And they obviously bust Rogue out of there, and then we get a cool action scene where it's really horrible, because one of my favourite X-Men dies twice in this movie. That's Iceman, and he sacrifices himself to let Magneto and Rogue escape. And before this, obviously they set it up where Kitty says to Iceman, just make sure that you bring yourself back here safe. And right there, that kind of seals his fate, because when Rogue gets back, Kitty just kind of looks over and she gives like a knowing glance to Rogue, and then she just breaks down because she knows exactly what's happened. And I like that Bryan Singer did give Iceman that relationship with Kitty, because obviously in his ones he was always with Rogue, and then it wasn't until why am I blanking on his name, Brett Ratner came in with X-Men 3 where he sort of created that love triangle. But here they don't really do a love triangle with it, it's just sort of a mutual respect between everyone.
Yeah, I think with the end of the world and that, they kind of know they can't be caught up in it all, but they kind of get the feeling to go, oh right, maybe we could do that in this. But it's one of them where the scene with Bobby, it was so brutal as well. I mean, you've already seen him die, getting his head decapitated, But in this, it's kind of like he's just doing all the wars and they're just burning through, and I think there's just three of them that just like
Just
brutalize
melts.
him.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you can kind of hear him screaming, and then it goes silent, and Patrick Stewart does like a Yoda sort of thing,
Mm.
and then like Ian McKellen's pretty upset as Magneto. So it was a really, really cool scene that worked, and
Yeah.
obviously it leads on to a kind of chase bit that happens as well.
Yeah, and then at the end of all that as well, this gives the reason as to how the Sentinels found them in the theatrical cut at the base they were in. Because in the theatrical cut, it's just sort of all the Sentinels happened to just find them, I guess, even though they were hidden, unless they tracked the jet or something. But what we find out here is that after the Sentinel attack, just as they were escaping, a bit of the Sentinel's arms broke off in the jet, and then it sent out some kind of tracking signal to signal all the other Sentinels to attack. And it still makes sense in the theatrical cut because you just kind of don't question that. But I think it's a neat little reason as to why that happened.
Yeah, because the way I saw it in the theatrical cut, because they found them at the beginning and they go back in time like a day or two, you kind of think they've got a day or two to send Wolverine to the future, but actually, the reason it's quicker, it's unexpected, is because of the tracking beacon. So it works well, and it's the fact that also now they know that it's the main X-Men are there. They kind of run like the whole of the warpath and everything, like this gigantic war's coming, and it leads on to one of the great scenes from the cut, which is obviously the future X-Men kicking ass and dying.
Wasn't that in the? Did you say that's the actual cut?
Yeah, I mentioned it's one it leads up to one of the theatrical cut
Oh,
scenes.
yeah, sorry, yeah, yeah. And for some reason, when I was watching the road cut, I felt like those scenes were placed differently, or it had different music over it. Maybe it's because it's been a while since I've seen the theatrical cut, and it might be exactly the same in the same way. But for some reason, I just had a lot more emotional attachment to it, seeing these characters die, and I'm not sure if that was the case because I thought it was sort of new, freshly edited, or if it's because the scenes that came before have helped reinforce that moment. But it's really hard to watch, and again, it's another moment where it's sort of straight out of a comic book. You've got the voiceover from all the past stuff going on, and we're getting the flashes of all our favourite mutants from the previous films just getting picked off one by one, and it's really hard to watch.
Yeah, I think also it's a great scene because although obviously we know at the end they all come back, they're all hunky dory. It would have been very easy for them to have kept them all alive. So the fact that they pick off like 80-90% of them before that, it's kind of just, okay, we know they're coming back, but at least this shows that there are stakes now rather than it just being easy and they never get there in time. Because
Mm.
it's literally like, a few foot away from them or they're all dead.
Yeah, I was going to say exactly the same as you. It ups the stakes and it shows you exactly what the mutants are up against, and it does make the Sentinels a massive fighting force in this film, which was obviously what everything was riding on. And then with the Rogue stuff, she just kind of takes the place of Kitty in the rest of the movie. Kitty's just kind of sitting this one out now. Then we just get really two other little scenes in the cut, not much to mention about them. At the ending, where they're going to try and stop Mystique from killing the president, Charles talks to a soldier, and the soldier kind of asks him how he loses his legs, because obviously he thinks he's a soldier as well. And he just says friendly fire, which again is another throwback to the ending of First Class.
Yeah, and it's not really comedy, but it was kind of that you kind of just smiled like very briefly. That also finally he's acknowledged that he's disabled rather than
Mm.
the over the top thing where he's trying to walk and losing his powers and stuff. But it kind of played into it. It's just that light bit of comic relief before it all goes downhill.
And I guess that sort of retakes the place of that line that was cut with Beast and Wolverine. So that sort of adds the levity into that bit before it gets all into the big action finale. And then there's a scene in the mid-credits which it looks like that you missed from it. But in the theatrical, obviously Fox made some kind of deal with Sony to endorse Amazing Spider-Man 2, so we got a scene from that in there. Now we get a proper mid-credit scene that's tied to Days of Future Past. What we get is it's Trask, Peter Dinklage's character. He's in the same prison that Magneto was in the Pentagon. He's grown a big bushy beard like he has in Series 5 of Game of Thrones, and then they slide a meal down to him. It's just like a sort of funny mid-credit scene, but to me, I would have cut this out completely because, one, why would Trask be locked in the Pentagon? Like, they saw what mutants can do, and even if one didn't shoot the president and walked off, it still shows how dangerous they are. And just because he tried to make robots to protect them that didn't go totally all right, I don't see why they would lock him in the Pentagon just for that. And also, like, the ending of the film ends on such an emotional, just gut punch, and then you get the awesome end credits theme once again by John Ottman with the classic X-Men 2 theme, and then it just goes into comedy. Like, I would have probably have just cut this out, but it's worth checking out if obviously you missed it.
Oh yeah, don't worry, I saw it on YouTube. Someone's already
Oh,
loaded it. It's one of them where I think they've just kind of reaffirming, although they have it in the newspapers just in case some idiots miss it. It's more or less, oh yeah, he's been arrested for war crimes, so it was one of them where it's like, oh, he's alive, so the future's alright. Because I think they mentioned the only reason they put the Sentinels into action is because of the fact that he was killed at the peace treaty, whereas although a lot of shit still went down, they decided not to genocide them all.
yeah. Um, but that's sort of all the scenes now from the road cut. So what we'll do is we'll give a quick opinion as to whether watching the scenes overall in the context of the movie, if we prefer it to the theatrical cut, if we still have problems with it, which one would we recommend, and then we'll move into, for like the last 10 minutes, just our thoughts on the theatrical and the rest of the film in general. So we'll start with you. What did you think of the Rogue Cut, and did it enhance your viewing experience of X-Men Days of Future Past?
It did make it better actually, because I really enjoyed the theatrical cut. It's in my top 10 for film of the year. And after seeing this, it's been I think the first time I saw it since it came out on Blu-ray, cinema. So it was only the third time I saw it, but I was starting to notice the differences, and it was making it better, explaining a bit more, and it was really cool seeing some of the stuff come into play. So it's kind of given it me this feeling where I was like, okay, this is better. If I'm going to watch it again in the future, I'm going to be watching the road cut probably every time now. And I think that's going to be the same for a lot of people, but I did think it improves the film. Although it's about 20 minutes, it still makes a bit of a difference, and it's a really cool subplot.
See, with me, I definitely would recommend the Rogue Cut, but say if you've bought the theatrical version of Days of Future Past and you're curious whether to rush out and buy this, again, it's not a lot added, so I wouldn't say, oh, you've got to simply have this, like, throw away the original copy of your theatrical cut and just watch this instead. Um, I do think the pacing slows down a little bit because this is where, throughout the whole film, the future stuff's been in very quick glances, but the focus is on all the past stuff. Whereas with the Rogue Cut, you get that whole bit at the mansion where you get like this subplot, which is just focused on the future. So I do think it slows the pacing down a little bit, but not a lot. But what I like about it is with bringing Rogue into it, because in the theatrical cut she's literally in like 2 to 5 seconds in the very last montage scene. It just feels like they brought the whole family back together again with the old cast, and obviously she was the character that got cut the most, so it's nice to see her scenes put back into it. I do think that helps reinforce the ending, and it gives a little bit more emotion to the characters, especially with the whole Death of Iceman scene and the stuff with Kitty. Um, so I guess I would recommend it, but I still do think that the theatrical cut is a fantastic movie in its own right. And if you're not sure whether to go and see it, I would just stick with the theatrical cut unless you are immensely curious to see these new scenes. It's not like a sort of Lord of the Rings extended cut thing where once you see that, that is the version you have to see from then on. I could very easily just throw in the theatrical cut and still get exactly the same level of enjoyment out of it as I did with the Rogue Cut. But I would highly recommend it. So, yeah, now for like the last 10 or so minutes, we'll just sort of talk about Days of Future Past in general, not so much the Rogue Cut, a couple of our favourite scenes, if we had any problems with it, and then favourite scenes. So we'll just jump into the positive and negatives then. What do you want to bring up first?
Positive wise, I think you sense the threat of the Sentinels, and by having the opening scene where they all die and stuff straight away, you kind of know that okay, everything's at stake. Stuff's gonna go down. So I think they build up the horrible future perfectly. Rather, I was gonna make a quick comparison. You look at Terminator Salvation, where they're just fighting back. In this, you can see that it's so bad you can't fight back, and it kind of gives you this like horrible world. Whereas if you look at some other, I mean, Terminator, just because it's a newer one,
Mm.
this kind of like you don't feel like there's a lot of stake with it, and you can sense that with a lot of apocalypse films, and this kind of just goes into how bad it will be, and it's almost like a sort of Holocaust bit.
And they do such a good job throwing you straight into that world. We get the voiceover with Patrick Stewart, and I think the Terminator comparison is a really good one because I did get that vibe a lot from it at the beginning. You've got like skeletons littering the ground. It's always night. The machines are after them. It's very, very Terminator, but that's just what the comic book is. Um, and you're right. I just loved being. I remember seeing this film, and this is sort of going back to First Class, but I was really, really not looking forward to First Class when that was coming out. I was like, because I thought it was a straight up reboot initially. I thought, oh, X-Men doesn't need rebooting. It's fantastic. The old cast is great. But when I saw that it was still tying into the old stuff, I absolutely loved First Class. And then when this came out and they announced that Bryan Singer, the original director of the first two, was back and they were going to bring more of the original cast back, I was just so behind the idea. And hearing the original John Ottman X-Men 2 theme back in it, it just felt like it was more at home, and we get to see all the mutants fighting with each other. And this is probably the best mutant fighting we've got in any of the X-Men films, I would say, in terms of a collaborative effort. Like the stuff with Blink, and she's throwing portals here, and Iceman sliding through them. It's great stuff to watch, and obviously the Rogue Cut adds more of that into it. But yeah, I think what this film does as well, which I want to bring up, is that it's not your typical other Marvel movies. It's not just mindless action for like 45 minutes to an hour. There's really not that much action in this film. But what it does well is that the action that it does have is fantastic, but it balances that with character and themes and story, and that's what this film has more than any of the other X-Men films, I would say.
Yeah, I think with a film of this scale and so much at stake, you have to get the sort of the character and the writing perfect. And what I want to say is that Matthew Vaughn wrote the original draft for this,
Hmm.
and you can see a lot of his handiwork all over. I know that Bryan Singer came and tweaked it, so originally you had Juggernaut breaking into the Pentagon, not Quicksilver, so there's one or two bits thrown around, some of it political because of Marvel, that's the only reason Quicksilver's there.
Yeah.
But I think they get it right, they don't have too much action, and again, that's the sort of Matthew Vaughn part I can see. If you look at films like Kingsman, there's actually only two or three action set pieces, so
Hmm.
same with Kick-Ass, and he gets it again right, and he's so good at writing the characters. It's a shame he didn't direct it, because I think it would have been better if he did it, but it was nice to see Bryan Singer come back, who knows how to work with the old cast.
See, I know that you prefer, I believe, First Class to this one. Um, Although I love First Class, that is quite evidently a Matthew Vaughn film. It's got his style all over it. I think that Bryan Singer's a lot more suited to the X-Men franchise. This seemed a lot more, not slower paced, but it took its time more, and I just felt there was more development there. Whereas I think First Class at points went a little hokey, which isn't a bad thing. Like, that's completely Matthew Vaughn's style. But if you watch, as you said, like Kingsman or Kick-Ass, you can see that style very much in the DNA of First Class.
Yeah, and you still get some of it in this, but I think the way Vaughn does it, he knows how to write, not action, but he knows a set piece, i.e. the sort of the Nazi stuff, and you get glimpses of it, the sort of portals, and the fight scenes in the future in this are so well done. And it's just, if they'd got that wrong, it would have been horrific. But the fact they got it right is perfect.
And then another positive I'll bring up before moving into a few problems I have with the film is that, and I guess this goes back to Matthew Vaughn as well, but the casting of the X-Men from the past stuff is just as good as the original cast that they had in the earlier X-Men films. Like, one of the things you can have in this film is that all the future stuff's great, you're loving the characters, and then it goes back to the past and you're like, oh god, these actors are terrible. But James McAvoy, Michael Fassbender, all fantastic. Even what's his name? The guy who plays Beast.
Nicholas Hoult.
Nicholas Hoult. He's great as Beast as well. And we didn't talk. We'll talk about that as well in favourite scenes. But seeing Kelsey Grammer back in that one uncredited bit as Beast was great as well. They're just fantastic to watch, and I could watch a whole 2 hour movie with just McAvoy and Fassbender playing a game of chess and just talking with each other. because they're just their chemistry and how they play off each other is fantastic.
Yeah, and I think they both love doing it. I mean, it's apparent if you ever see the sort of Comic Con stuff or Fassbender talking about it, I think
Mm.
they both love doing it. And although to be fair to both of them, they've done a lot of critically acclaimed roles each. It's nice that they're not doing this as a paycheck as a few of them are. They're kind of doing it because they love it, and you get the gist of a lot of this cast. Whereas if you look at some of the Avengers stuff, you can sense that one or two of them are there not for the money, but they'd rather be doing other things, but they don't mind that paycheck.
Mm. Yeah, and there's just more substance in this, I think, and I think the script's a lot better. It takes itself more seriously, but it still has that superhero quality to it. It plays on real life themes, but just with that superhero twist. And I think that it gives the actors chance to actually act and explore these characters more and get inside their mindset and all stuff like that. Like the stuff they do with Xavier in this film's brilliant, and his turmoil trying to stop Mystique because she's like a sister to him, and stop Magneto as well. But you can also see that Magneto and Charles are on just different faces of the same coin. It's exploring that relationship's great, and whereas you get in a lot of Avengers films, is what I said, the focus is more on the sort of the spectacle and the action more than the substance. So that's why X-Men is still my favourite property within Marvel. That goes for the comics as well. But I know we're pushed for time now, so we'll move into negatives if we have any. Um, it's very difficult for me to think of any negatives actually, because this is probably, I would go on record and say this is my favourite comic book movie post Dark Knight and Kick-Ass. I think that just it's a perfect movie, whether it's superhero film or not. If I do have to have a negative, but this just goes into the writing, it's that they very quickly get rid of Quicksilver, because they establish him as this sort of ubermensch of a mutant who can just basically do anything. He could win the film for them in like less than a minute, but they get rid of him quite quickly, and that's just because they wrote themselves into the corner. And I think you've talked about this before, where you said that was like the whole politics with Marvel, just wanting to use him. They use him, then just get rid of him straight out of the film.
Yeah, I think I've got one minor issue with it, and it is Quicksilver. When they announced it, they're like, we've got the name Quicksilver. Marvel, you can't reference him. You have to call him Maximoff and all that crap. So it was very rushed, and the fact he's not into it at all. Whereas, obviously, I'll say again, I am a fan of one. The person, I forgot his name, who looks like Stifler, the one that plays Stryker
Oh,
in
Striker,
this,
yeah.
he said before he was cast as Juggernaut when he joined. Then it came out, goes, oh yeah, there was a massive set piece of Juggernaut breaking out Magneto. So when you get them two and two together, it kind of felt like, although Quicksilver's scene was quality, it's just there for the politics. Whereas I would have liked to have seen Juggernaut, 'cause clearly he had a bigger role in the film, or else they wouldn't have given him the minor role as Stryker.
Mm.
And the
I
other, sorry, I was just going to say, the other minor thing I have is they kind of fix it in the road cut, but it's the fact that they basically skip first class, but you kind of get the coin and a few things, so it kind of patches that up.
Yeah, I was just gonna say with Juggernaut, I think it's right that they use Quicksilver and bring someone new into it. I mean, we've seen Juggernaut before, obviously not played how we probably wanted him to be in X-Men 3, but I don't know. I don't think now I've seen the film, I just can't picture Juggernaut in that scene. I know he obviously has the power when he increases momentum to break through anything, and that would have still made sense. But I really like that dynamic of Quicksilver, and that was one of my biggest. Before seeing the film, I was like, "Oh God, this character's going to be terrible." I mean, you looked how he was dressed. He had the goggles on. He had the silver hair. He had the stupid silver PVC jacket, and you're like, "Oh God, this is gonna ruin the film." And then you see it, and you talked about that scene, and that scene alone steals the entire show. And I guess that's a good segue into what some of our favourite scenes are. Now I know there's so many, and usually I would probably say the Quicksilver scene because it is beautifully shot, it is funny, and the song that's played during it's great as well. But I think if I had to pick my single favourite scene, it'd have to be the ending where Wolverine wakes back up and he's exploring the mansion, and we get that music that sounds. You were talking about this yesterday. Sounds a lot like "Time" by Hans Zimmer from the Inception soundtrack. He's like moving room to room. He's seeing all the old mutants and stuff, and then he finally sees Jean Grey and the surprise cameo again from Cyclops, Scott Summers, and It's really emotional because I think this will probably be the last time that we see all the old X-Men cast in a film together. I don't think they'll probably use them in the future. I think now they'll probably focus on the past stuff with all the new cast, which is fair enough because it's the series has got to advance. So it felt like a farewell, but it was also like we've returned home. It gets rid of all the continuity errors from the previous ones, and it just feels right, and it's a good emotional finale to the film, I think.
Yeah, that scene's one of the best ones, and it rights the wrongs of X-Men 3, which was the main gist of it. I think my favourite scene is probably the opening fight scene with the portals, because Blink was his
Yeah.
character no one really knew anything about, but when that scene happens, it was so cool seeing the stuff they do and how they all work well together. I know they do it similar at the end, but that opening fight scene's one of the best action scenes I've seen in a long time.
Oh yeah, I'll agree with that, and it's really cool seeing all the mutants like working with each other, which we got in First Class, but it's kind of brought into it more here. I did actually think of two really quick problems before we close out. I know a lot of people that followed the series were very confused as to how Charles Xavier was just back. Like, obviously, he gets killed in X-Men 3, and there was no film in between that and this where he was in it. And then all of a sudden he just shows up and he's fine. I know there was the after credit scene which shows that he could move his consciousness between different bodies, but we never get that. And then I thought of one with the Rogue Cut as well, because I believe she gets the cure in X-Men 3 and she just turns into a regular human. And then all of a sudden she's got her powers in this one, unless because at the end of the film obviously we see that Magneto's almost getting his powers back, so it might be a like a temporary cure.
Yeah, I think it's one of them where the sign at the end of X-Men 3 is the fact that the cure never worked after all, so that explains how they've got it in the future. And with the scene, I forgot the name. I'll cut this out. I've forgotten. You carry on.
But yeah, so just those slight continuity problems. I know the whole X-Men series is rife with continuity gaps and stuff like that, and it's a bit infuriating if you try to, especially when it like connects back to the old stuff and you try to like fill in the blanks. But that was just one thing that stood out to me. But you just kind of you have to create your own reason for it to be there, and you don't question it all that much because it's just great seeing Patrick Stewart back or Anna Paquin in the Rogue Cut. So yeah, I guess that's our review on Days of Future Past, the Rogue Cut, and a little bit of our thoughts on the theatrical version as well. Let us know what you think. Have you seen the Rogue Cut? Are you interested in buying it? Let us know what you think of that, if it sort of enhanced your viewing experience of the movie. And let us know what you think of X-Men Days of Future Past overall, because it's, in my opinion, it's one of the best comic book films we've ever had. But yeah, be sure to stick around with our channel. We'll have a lot more reviews coming out very, very soon. You can follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/cinema savvy, or you can find us on Twitter at /cinema_savvy, as well as on letterbox.com/cinema_savvy. So, that was our review for Days of Future Past. On Monday, we'll have our exciting review for Marvel's latest movie, Ant-Man. So be sure to come back for that, because I really don't know what to think of that film, and I think we'll have a lot to say on that one. So until then, thanks very much for listening.